Welcome to the deep dive. Today, you've challenged us with something fascinating. We're going back way back to 1960.
We are. We're looking at Warren Buffett's annual letter to his partners from that year.
Right. And our mission, really, is to unpack this foundational document. We want to get at the core principles of his early thinking, how he measured success, and there's this one particular investment story.
Oh, the Sanborn map story, yeah.
Exactly. It seems like it really shows the why behind his whole approach, even back then.
It really does. And what's so great about this letter is you get this direct glimpse, into his thought process right at the start of his career.
It's not just numbers.
No, not at all. It's about the deep convictions guiding him.
Absolutely. And you're going to discover some surprising things, not just about the 1960 market, but about the human side of business, of investing, stuff that still feels relevant today.
Definitely.
So let's dive in. To really get Buffett's mindset in 1960, we need to see the market like he did. What was the scene like? What was the backdrop, according to his letter?
Well, 1960 was a big reversal from 59, a really stark one.
How so?
In 1959, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, it shot up 16.4%. Pretty good year. But, get this, less than 10% of investment companies actually managed to match that gain.
Wow, only 10%.
Yeah. Then 1960 rolls around and the industrial average actually declines. It's down 9.3% or 6.3% if you count the dividends.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though. Buffett points out this weird thing. Even though the Dow dropped, he says something like 90% of investment companies beat it in 1960.
That's right, a complete flip.
Most ended up somewhere in the, plus or minus 5% range. What does that tell you? That the main average wasn't the whole story.
Exactly. It just shows how misleading those headline averages can be. The industrial struggled, sure, but the utility average actually did okay, had good gains. And if you look broader, there were more stocks losing value than gaining, 653 losers versus 404 winners. So it's a very mixed bag. Not a simple downturn. Stock picking really mattered.
So, okay, in that kind of tricky mixed market, what was Buffett's main goal? What was he trying to achieve for his partnerships?
His objective, and he was very clear about this, was always long-term performance superior to the industrial average.
Superior,
Yeah.
not just matching it.
Right. He saw the average as a decent proxy for what leading investment companies were doing. And he basically said, look, if we don't beat the average over the long haul, there's, and I quote, no reason for existence of the partnerships.
Strong words.
Oh,
But how did he define superior? Because it wasn't just about making the most money when the market was flying high, was it?
no, not at all. He's very explicit. He says, and this is key, it is likely that if such an advantage is achieved, it will be through better than average performance in stable or declining markets. And average, or perhaps even poorer than average performance in rising markets.
So do better when things are tough or flat.
Precisely. It's a philosophical cornerstone for him. He gives this great analogy. He says, I would consider a year in which we declined 15% and the average 30% to be much superior to a year when both we and the average advanced 20%.
That makes sense. It's about relative performance.
Exactly. He uses the golf analogy, too, beating par. A 4 on a par 3 isn't as good as a 5 on a par 5. It's about how well you do given the conditions.
It's like he's managing expectations.
Right.
Especially for new partners. Saying, look, bad years will happen, the market will go down, but judge us on how we do compared to the market.
That's exactly it. It's a very different mindset. So much focus today is just on the absolute number. Did you make money? But he's saying, how did you play the course that year?
So, sticking with that philosophy, how did they actually do in 1960? Was it one of those better than average years he predicted for down markets?
It was absolutely a perfect example. The industrial average, you remember, had that overall loss of 6.3%.
Right.
The partnerships that were running for the whole year, they achieved a 22.8% gain.
Wow. A 22.8% gain when the Dow was down over 6%. That's significant outperformance.
It really is.
How did that fit into the bigger picture? What about the cumulative results for those first few years, say 57 through 60?
Yeah, looking at the cumulative picture really drives it home. On a compounded basis, from 1957 through 1960, the partnerships were up 140.6%.
140.6%, and the Dow.
The Dow gained 42.6% over that same 4-year stretch.
Let's just quickly run through those years again.
Sure, 1957 partnership plus 10.4%, Dow Navy 8.4%. 1958. Partnership plus 40.9%, Dow plus 32.9%, Dow plus 38.5%, closer that year. 1959, partnership plus 25.9%, Dow plus 19.9%, 1960. Partnership plus 22.8%. Dow and a good 6.3%.
Exactly. And he acknowledges, 4 years is too short to draw ironclad conclusions.
Sure.
But he says the evidence points toward confirming the proposition that our results should be relatively better in moderately declining or static markets.
So what does that performance pattern suggest about what he was actually investing in? It probably wasn't the popular blue chip stocks of the day. Almost certainly not. It strongly suggests the portfolio was, as he puts it, more conservatively, although decidedly less conventionally, invested than if we owned blue chip securities.
Less conventionally.
Yeah. He expected difficulty keeping pace with blue chips in a really strong bull market. This points right to that value-oriented, often contrarian approach he's famous for right from the beginning, finding things others overlooked or misunderstood, protecting the downside.
Makes sense. And with results like that, the partnerships must have been growing. More partners, more money. Did he mention any growing pains or operational things he was thinking about?
He did. He touched on the multiplicity of partnerships. Even though he tried hard to keep them all invested in the same things in the same proportions, there were still small differences in performance year to year. Just the logistics, I guess.
So what was his solution?
His hope was, in the next few years, to combine them all into one big partnership, make things simpler, cut down on detail and expense. But he knew that would need every single partner to agree. Unanimous consent.
Tricky. He also mentioned advance payments. What was that about?
Right. So for the partnerships that had more than one family involved, the mixed ones, you could only officially add new money at the end of the year.
Okay.
But they let people make payments during the year. They called them advance payments. The partnership would pay 6% interest on that money until December 31st.
Oh, like a holding account.
Exactly. Then at year end, the original payment plus the interest earned got rolled into the partner's capital account.
Got it. Okay, let's shift gears because this next part is, well, it takes up a big chunk of the letter and it's quite a story. He talks about one investment making up a very high and unusual proportion, 35% of their assets.
Yeah, the Sanborn Map Company.
Sanborn Map, what exactly was this company? What did they do?
Sanborn Map was kind of unique. They published these incredibly detailed maps of cities all across the U.S., and they were constantly revising them.
How detailed are we talking?
He mentions the map for Omaha could weigh 50 pounds. They showed tiny details, the diameter of water mains, where fire hydrants were, what roofs were made of.
50 pounds?
Yeah.
Why? Who needed that level of detail?
Primarily fire insurance companies. They used these maps to assess risk on properties nationally. For about 75 years, Sanborn had this business pretty much locked up, a near monopoly. Consistent profits, recession-proof almost.
Sounds like a dream business.
Yeah.
Stable, predictable, maybe a bit boring.
You could say that. But then things started to change in the early 1950s.
What happened? Competition.
Yeah, a new underwriting method called carding started catching on. It was likely more efficient, maybe used early data processing. It started eating into Sanborn's core business.
And the impact.
It was dramatic. Sanborn's after-tax profits from making maps, which used to be over $500,000 a year back in the late 30s, plummeted. By 1958 and 59, they were making less than $100,000 a year from the map business. It was, as Buffett termed it, an almost complete elimination of their main earning power.
Wow. So the core business was basically dying. But you hinted earlier there was something else, a hidden part.
Yes, exactly. And this is the key. Way back in the 1930s, Sanborn started building an investment portfolio.
Why?
Because the map business didn't need much capital. It generated cash, but didn't need reinvestment to grow. So they took the retained earnings and bought stocks and bonds.
Smart.
Over time, they put about $2.5 million into this portfolio, roughly half in bonds, half in stocks. And while the map business was shrinking, this investment portfolio, especially the stocks, was growing, particularly in the 1950s bull market.
Okay, so you have this shrinking map business and this growing investment portfolio all inside one company. This must have created a weird valuation situation.
Totally weird. He gives these striking numbers. In 1938, the Dow was maybe 100, 120. Sanborn stock sold for $110 a share.
Okay.
Back then, the investments were worth about $20 per share. So the market was saying the map business itself was worth $90 a share, $110 minus $20. Makes sense. It was profitable then. Now, fast forward to 1958. The Dow's way up, around 550. But Sanborn stock is trading at only $45 a share.
45. But what about the investment portfolio? It must have grown a lot by then.
It had. By 1958, the investment portfolio alone was worth $65 per share.
Wait, the stock is $45, but the investments inside are worth $65.
Exactly.
So the market was valuing the actual map-making business, the original company, at minus $20 per share.
That's the math. And buyers were only paying about 70 cents on the dollar for the easily sellable stocks and bonds. $45 price, $65 portfolio value. Essentially getting the map business with all its potentially valuable data thrown in for less than free.
That is just mind-boggling. How does that even happen?
Mm.
Especially since, as you said, the map data itself was probably still valuable, even if the business model was dated.
Inertia. That seems to be the main culprit Buffett points
That's
to.
inertia.
Yeah, they had this incredibly valuable asset information that he estimated would cost tens of millions of dollars to replicate, but their way of selling it, packaging it, hadn't changed.
And the board. Weren't they worried?
Well, the income from the booming investment portfolio kind of masked the problem, or at least reduced the urgency. Dividends were cut 5 times in 8 years, which should have been a huge red flag.
You'd think.
But Buffett notes there's no record of anyone suggesting cutting directors' fees or salaries. Complacency seems to have set in, enabled by the investment income.
Which brings us to the board itself. Buffett really dissects the board composition in the letter, doesn't he? What did he find?
It's quite revealing. There were 14 directors. 9 of them were prominent insurance executives, the main customers of the map business.
Okay, that sounds relevant.
But combined, those 9 insurance guys owned a grand total of 46 shares out of 105,000 shares outstanding.
46 shares combined.
The biggest individual holding among them was 10 shares. These are high-level execs. Their own companies only held tiny token amounts of Sanborn stock. And worse, insurance companies had generally been selling Sanborn stock for the last decade, not buying.
So the people who should understand the business best had virtually no skin in the game and were actually divesting. That's not good. Who else was on the board?
The company lawyer, a banker who Buffett notes actually seemed to grasp the problems, and the top 2 managers. These managers were capable, understood the issues, but were kept in a subservient role by this board. And then there was one more. The son of a former president who had passed away. His mother still held a big block of stock, about 15,000 shares.
Okay, so you have this detached board, a dying core business, and this valuable hidden asset in the investment portfolio. How did Buffett get involved? What was his angle?
It started in late 1958. That son of the former president, he was unhappy with how things were going, got turned down for the top job, and resigned from the board.
Interesting.
Buffett saw an opportunity. He successfully bid for the mother's large block of stock. That was his entry point.
Okay, so you bought a big chunk, then what?
Then he and associates in his partnerships started buying more shares on the open market. They accumulated about 24,000 shares. And crucially, they found common cause with 2 other large shareholders who were also unhappy with the situation.
Building a coalition.
Exactly. Together, this group controlled about 46,000 shares, getting close to half the company.
And their objective was pretty straightforward, right? Unlock the value.
Yeah, crystal clear. He spells it out. Separate the 2 businesses, realize the fair value of the investment portfolio, and work to reestablish the earning power of the map business.
Makes perfect sense. But how did they pull it off? You said the board was resistant to change, especially from an outsider like Buffett. Did it end up in a proxy fight?
It almost did. Management was actually on board with a similar plan. Even outside consultants, Booz, Allen, and Hamilton had recommended something along the same lines.
So the managers agreed.
Yes, but the board, particularly the insurance guys, dug in their heels. Buffett says there was considerable opposition to change of any type. So, to avoid a costly, time-consuming proxy battle, they devised this alternative plan.
The one you mentioned earlier.
Right. Offer to exchange shares for the underlying portfolio securities at fair value. Let anyone who wanted out get out cleanly with their share of the investments. They took it to the SEC, and the SEC gave it the green light.
Brilliant. So what happened then? How did this melodrama, as he calls it, conclude?
It worked beautifully. About 72% of Sanborn stock ended up being tendered in this exchange offer. That represented about half of all the stockholders.
So half the owners basically said, yes, give me my share of the investments, I'm out.
Pretty much. They got portfolio securities equal to the fair value of their Sanborn shares, and this left the remaining Sanborn company, the map business, in a much healthier state.
How so?
Well, the map business now had over $1.25 million in cash from government and municipal bonds held back from the portfolio as a reserve. Plus, this maneuver eliminated a potential corporate capital gains tax bill of over $1 million that would have been due if Sanborn had just sold the portfolio outright.
And the stockholders who stayed What was in it for them?
They ended up with a slightly higher asset value per share, much higher earnings per share, since earnings were now divided among fewer shares, and the company increased the dividend rate, so it seemed like a win-win-win.
Wow. That's quite a piece of financial engineering and shareholder activism, especially for 1960. So, what did Buffett tell his partners this whole episode meant? What were the lessons?
He drew a couple of direct conclusions. First, it reinforced the need for secrecy regarding our portfolio operations. You can see why telegraphing moves like this could make them much harder.
Makes sense.
Second, it showed the futility of measuring our results over a short span of time, such as a year. This Sanborn situation took time to identify, time to build a position, time to execute the plan. It wasn't a quick flip.
Right, it was strategic.
He also called these control situations infrequent, but noted that as the partnerships grew larger, they might find more opportunities like this.
But he was careful to separate this from their main business, wasn't he?
Yes, he made a clear distinction. He said their bread and butter business was still buying undervalued securities and selling when the undervaluation is corrected, along with special situations where profits depend on corporate actions like mergers or spin-offs, rather than just market movements. Sanborn was maybe a blend of undervalued and special situation control.
So looking back at this whole 1960 letter, what really jumps out at you? The market insights, the philosophy, or is it the Sanborn story?
For me, I think connecting it all, it's how the philosophy is demonstrated through something like Sanborn. It shows that long-term value investing, his style anyway, wasn't passive. It was about seeing what others missed, seeing the $65 portfolio inside the $45 stock.
Yeah.
Understanding the reasons for the mispricing, like board inertia, and then having the conviction, the patience, and frankly, the strategic skill to actively force the value to be realized. It wasn't just waiting for the market to wake up. It's about understanding not just what a company is, but what it could be.
That's a great way to put it. This whole deep dive into his early thinking, it just offers so many nuggets for any learner listening. The focus on relative performance, the conservatism in down markets, the patience,
Absolutely.
and that Sanborn story. It really makes you think, doesn't it? In today's world, everything moves so fast, everyone wants instant results. Are we, as investors or just observers, still capable of spotting those Sanborn-like situations? Those slow-burning hidden gems where the real value is obscured by inertia or neglect? And maybe more importantly, even if we spot them, do we have the patience, the conviction to see them through?
That's the multi-million-dollar question, isn't it? Food for thought.